A future queen copying the future queen consort? It sounds unbelievable, yet royal watchers have quietly noticed a pattern for years. From fashion choices to public appearances, moments emerged where Queen Camilla appeared to mirror the style and strategy of Catherine, Princess of Wales. But each time, the reaction was very different. What looked like imitation often turned into awkward comparisons. And behind palace walls, insiders whispered that these similarities were not accidental. But was it rivalry, or royal survival? The story begins with a quiet tension inside the royal spotlight. Viewers had just started asking a simple but uneasy question. Were the similarities between senior royal women just coincidence, or something more strategic? The curiosity didn't come out of nowhere. It grew slowly, one public appearance at a time, as observers began to compare Queen Camilla with Catherine, Princess of Wales. At first, it looked harmless. But the deeper you look, the more layered the story becomes. To understand this comparison, we have to go back to the moment Catherine entered royal life. When she married Prince William in 2011, she instantly became a global icon. Few remember that within just 2 years, fashion analysts had already named her influence the Kate effect, because clothes she wore sold out within hours. That kind of public power is rare, even inside royalty. It signaled that a new kind of royal figure had arrived, modern, relatable, and deeply watched. But at the same time, Camilla was walking a very different path. Her journey into public acceptance had been long and difficult. For decades, public opinion around her remained divided due to past controversies surrounding her relationship with the then Prince Charles. What many people don't realize is that Camilla spent years deliberately keeping a low profile, focusing on charity work instead of high-glamour appearances. Palace insiders later revealed that this was a slow strategy to rebuild trust, not a coincidence. Then something interesting happened. As Catherine's popularity soared, Camilla's public image also began to soften. Polls over the years showed her approval ratings gradually improving, especially after she launched literacy campaigns and domestic violence awareness initiatives. Few know that her charity work with reading rooms across the UK significantly boosted her reputation among older royal supporters. It showed dedication. It showed patience. But it also placed her in a changing royal landscape, one now heavily shaped by Catherine's modern appeal. Royal tradition has always been clear about one thing. Each senior royal maintains a distinct public identity. Historically, wardrobe choices, speech styles, and even body language were carefully coordinated by palace aides to avoid overlap. This was not vanity. It was hierarchy management. In fact, lesser-known palace protocols suggest that major royal events often include advanced wardrobe planning specifically to prevent two senior women from appearing visually similar on the same day. That makes any resemblance far more noticeable. And this is where observers began to pay closer attention. Catherine's signature approach was simple yet powerful, repeating outfits, greeting crowds warmly, and presenting herself as a hands-on mother. She once personally took photographs of her children for official birthday portraits, something that quietly broke a long-standing royal photography tradition. It made her seem approachable, human, real. Camilla, on the other hand, represented continuity and experience. She had grown up outside the direct royal spotlight and once worked as a secretary and stable manager before marrying into the royal circle. That background made her more traditional in tone, more measured in speech, and more aligned with older royal customs. Yet, over time, some royal watchers noticed subtle shifts. Softer wardrobe colors, warmer public smiles, more conversational speeches at events. Were these changes simply natural growth, or careful adaptation in response to Catherine's overwhelming popularity? That question began to quietly circulate among commentators. Some even suggested that the monarchy, facing a rapidly changing media world, needed both women to appear united in style and message. After all, modern royal survival depends heavily on public perception. A 21st-century monarchy cannot ignore public mood, especially when younger audiences engage mostly through social media comparisons. Still, palace officials never confirmed any deliberate strategy. And without confirmation, speculation grew stronger. Each new appearance was studied, each fashion choice analyzed, each speech tone dissected. The comparisons were not loud at first. They were whispers. But whispers, inside royal history, often grow into defining narratives. And as these whispers grew, one uncomfortable possibility started to form in the public imagination. Not rivalry, not conflict, but something more complex. A silent adaptation happening under constant global scrutiny. Because if these similarities were intentional, they suggested careful image recalibration within the monarchy itself. And if they were accidental, then the coincidence was becoming harder to ignore. But the real question remained unanswered. Was Camilla quietly learning from Catherine's success? Or was the palace witnessing the start of a subtle royal competition that no one had expected? The whispers from the last chapter left one question hanging in the air. Were the similarities between the two senior royal women just natural evolution, or a quiet form of imitation shaped by public pressure? That question gained new energy when royal watchers began spotting patterns that felt too consistent to ignore. It wasn't just about one outfit or one speech. It became a sequence, a rhythm. And once the rhythm started, the comparisons grew louder with every public appearance. The shift seemed to begin in the mid-2010s, when Catherine, Princess of Wales, had firmly established herself as the monarchy's modern face. Her wardrobe choices were carefully balanced, elegant but affordable-looking, polished yet approachable. Lesser-known fact, palace aides have quietly confirmed that Catherine often mixes high-end designer pieces with high-street brands on purpose, creating a relatable image that resonates strongly with younger audiences. That strategy worked almost instantly. Fashion analysts recorded dramatic spikes in sales after her appearances, proving the public was not just watching, they were copying her. Then, slowly, observers noticed something else. Within months of Catherine popularizing softer pastel coats, tailored silhouettes, and wide-brimmed hats, similar styling choices began appearing in the wardrobe of Queen Camilla. At first, this seemed harmless. After all, royal fashion often follows seasonal trends. But the timing raised eyebrows. The resemblance often appeared shortly after Catherine wore similar colors or cuts at major events, creating what some commentators described as style echoes. Here is where royal tradition makes the story more complex. Historically, senior royal women have worked hard to maintain distinct visual identities to help the public easily recognize hierarchy and roles. Few people know that wardrobe coordination meetings are sometimes held before major royal events to avoid accidental visual clashes. This makes repeated similarities unusual, not impossible, but certainly noticeable. And when patterns appear in an institution built on tradition, speculation naturally follows. The turning point came when side-by-side photo comparisons began circulating online and in newspapers. Royal commentators pointed out similarities in coat lengths, hat shapes, and even handbag choices during separate engagements. Some analysts argued it was a calculated modernization strategy, helping Camilla soften her image as she stepped into a more prominent royal role. Others suggested it was coincidence amplified by media obsession. But once the comparisons reached headlines, the narrative took on a life of its own. Another lesser-known detail adds weight to this turning point. After major royal transitions, communication teams often adjust public presentation styles to reflect changing leadership roles. When Charles became king, Camilla's position naturally elevated, meaning her public image needed to align more closely with the future direction of the monarchy. That future, in the public mind, was strongly represented by Catherine's youthful and relatable presence. Aligning styles could therefore signal unity rather than rivalry. But to the watching world, unity and imitation can look dangerously similar. Public events only intensified the perception. On several occasions, Camilla appeared at separate engagements wearing color palettes that closely matched Catherine's recent outfits: soft blues, creams, and muted pinks. Fashion historians note that such tones traditionally symbolize calmness and stability in royal messaging, especially during periods of transition. This suggests the similarities may not have been personal copying, but institutional signaling. Yet, media coverage rarely explores that level of nuance. Instead, simple comparisons attract more attention, and attention fuels speculation. Emotionally, this period also marked a subtle shift inside the royal narrative. Catherine was widely praised for seeming effortless, while Camilla was often described as carefully managed. This difference in perception created an unspoken contrast, one seen as naturally modern, the other as deliberately adapting. It wasn't necessarily fair. But perception, especially in monarchy, often matters more than intention. Once audiences begin comparing personalities rather than just appearances, the stakes rise dramatically. Royal insiders reportedly grew aware of the narrative and monitored reactions closely. Lesser-known fact, public sentiment tracking is regularly reviewed by palace communications teams, especially during periods of increased media scrutiny. This allows the monarchy to adjust engagement styles in response to public mood. If similarities were indeed strategic, they may have been part of a broader effort to maintain unity in the face of constant comparison between generations of royal women. Yet, something deeper was changing. The comparisons were no longer limited to fashion. Observers began pointing to similarities in tone during speeches, in gestures while greeting crowds, and even in the way both women handled media attention. Some commentators described it as a blending of styles to present a cohesive royal image. Others warned that too much similarity could blur individuality, which historically has been crucial to maintaining distinct royal roles. And this is where the tension truly escalated. Because once public figures appear to mirror each other, audiences begin asking a far more uncomfortable question, not about style, but about authenticity. Was Camilla genuinely evolving as a royal figure, or was she being reshaped by expectations created by Catherine's overwhelming popularity? The palace never publicly addressed these comparisons. Silence, however, can sometimes speak louder than denial. Each new appearance, each similar tone, each shared visual message added another layer to the narrative. The turning point was no longer a single moment. It became an unfolding pattern, one that forced the monarchy to balance tradition, modern image, and public scrutiny all at once. And just when it seemed like the similarities might settle into quiet acceptance, the media began digging deeper, compiling timelines and visual analyses that transformed whispers into full-scale headlines. Because what started as subtle style echoes was about to become a full-blown public narrative, one that questioned not just fashion choices, but the very authenticity of royal identity itself. By now, the turning point had done its job. The similarities were no longer just quiet whispers among royal watchers. They had become visible patterns. And once the media spotted those patterns, everything changed. The question that lingered at the end of the last chapter, authentic growth or careful imitation, suddenly moved from private discussions into public headlines. It started subtly. A few royal commentators placed side-by-side images of Queen Camilla and Catherine, Princess of Wales, during separate engagements. The similarities seemed small at first. Similar coat colors, comparable hat styles, even similar posture during walkabouts. But when these images were repeated again and again, the comparisons began to feel intentional. In the world of royal coverage, repetition creates narrative, and narrative shapes public belief. Few people realize how powerful visual comparison is in royal media culture. For decades, newspapers have used side-by-side imagery to build public perception, especially when analyzing royal women. During the 1980s and 1990s, similar comparisons were frequently made between different senior royal figures to suggest generational shifts in style and public appeal. That historical pattern made modern comparisons feel familiar, almost expected. But familiarity doesn't make the fallout any less intense. Once the story took hold, commentators began debating whether these similarities were part of a coordinated palace strategy. Lesser-known fact, royal households often employ image consultants who advise on clothing tone, event themes, and visual messaging, especially during periods of institutional transition. If that was the case, the similarities might not have been personal decisions at all. They could have been carefully designed signals meant to show unity between the monarchy's present and future female figures. But the media rarely frames such nuance gently. Instead, headlines simplified the story. Some described Camilla as adapting to match Catherine's modern appeal. Others went further, suggesting she was copying a formula that had already proven successful with the public. That framing carried emotional weight. Because while adaptation sounds strategic, copying sounds insecure. And once that emotional angle took hold, the fallout grew more dramatic. Public reaction was divided. Supporters of Camilla argued that evolving style is natural for anyone stepping into a more visible role, especially after becoming queen consort. They pointed out that she had spent years improving her public image through consistent charity work, long before these comparisons emerged. Few know that her reading initiatives and domestic violence awareness campaigns were praised quietly within policy circles, even when they received limited tabloid attention. Those efforts showed substance beyond appearance. Meanwhile, admirers of Catherine saw the comparisons differently. To them, Catherine represented authenticity, someone who seemed effortlessly aligned with modern royal expectations. They noted her habit of repeating outfits to promote sustainability, a move widely praised by environmental advocates. That practice quietly broke an old royal norm where senior women were expected to debut new outfits at major events. The contrast reinforced the perception that Catherine's style choices came from personal conviction, not calculated adaptation. As debates intensified, royal analysts began exploring a deeper implication. Image overlap could blur individual identity inside the monarchy. Historically, each senior royal woman cultivated a distinct public role to avoid confusion about hierarchy and responsibilities. Queen Elizabeth II, for example, maintained a consistent visual identity for decades, using bold monochrome outfits to remain easily visible in crowds. That wasn't just fashion, it was strategic visibility. Such consistency made any perceived overlap between Camilla and Catherine feel more significant than it might appear on the surface. The fallout also touched internal palace dynamics, at least according to royal commentators. If the public narrative began framing Camilla as imitative, it risked undermining the independent authority expected of a queen consort. On the other hand, visible unity between senior royal women could also strengthen the monarchy's overall image of stability. This created a delicate balance. Similarity could signal harmony, but too much similarity might suggest lack of individuality. Managing that balance is one of the monarchy's quiet but constant challenges. Another lesser-known detail added fuel to the conversation. Royal engagements are often scheduled months in advance, and wardrobe planning usually considers the tone of each event. If similarities appeared despite that planning, it meant either the coordination allowed it intentionally, or the overlap truly was coincidental. Both possibilities carried consequences. Intentional overlap could be read as strategic unity. Accidental overlap could suggest poor coordination at the highest levels of royal presentation. Neither interpretation was entirely comfortable. Then came the twist. Some commentators began suggesting that the comparisons themselves might be unfairly amplified by modern media culture, where social media magnifies even minor similarities into major talking points. In earlier decades, such overlaps might have passed unnoticed. But in a digital age where every royal appearance is analyzed frame by frame, even small parallels can quickly become global narratives. This raised a new question. Were the similarities truly increasing, or was public scrutiny simply becoming sharper? The fallout, therefore, was not just about fashion or gestures. It became a story about perception, authenticity, and institutional image management all at once. And the more the media examined these patterns, the more the public began to view them as part of a larger royal storyline rather than isolated coincidences. Yet, despite all the headlines and debates, one mystery remained unresolved. Did these comparisons actually damage Camilla's standing within the monarchy, or were they quietly helping her transition into a more widely accepted role alongside the future queen? Because the next phase of this story would not be shaped by clothes or appearances alone. It would be shaped by something far more powerful: public opinion. The fallout from media comparisons left one pressing question unanswered. Did these similarities actually change how the public felt about the two royal women? As the headlines multiplied and the side-by-side images spread across newspapers and social media, public opinion began to shift in subtle but powerful ways. What started as quiet commentary was now becoming a measurable image crisis, one shaped not only by perception but by numbers, polls, and emotional loyalty. Public sentiment toward Catherine, Princess of Wales, had been strong for years. From the moment she married Prince William, she was seen as a symbol of stability and renewal for the monarchy. Lesser-known fact: early opinion polls in the UK often placed her approval ratings above many senior royals within just a few years of her wedding. This was unusual. Traditionally, it took decades for new royal figures to gain that level of public trust. Catherine's rapid rise suggested she connected with audiences on a deeply personal level. Meanwhile, Queen Camilla faced a more complicated public journey. Her approval ratings improved steadily over time, especially after she focused heavily on charity work and literacy campaigns. Few people know that her reading room initiatives quietly partnered with libraries and community groups across Britain, earning respect from educational organizations even when tabloid coverage remained cautious. These efforts showed dedication beyond appearances, but public memory of past controversies still lingered, shaping how new comparisons were interpreted. When the visual similarities between the two women became a media topic, polls began to reveal a subtle gap in emotional perception. Surveys indicated that younger audiences often viewed Catherine as natural and relatable, while older royal supporters described Camilla as steady and traditional. Neither label was negative on its own. But together, they created a contrast that reinforced the narrative of modernity versus continuity. And in a monarchy trying to balance past and future, that contrast carried enormous symbolic weight. Royal commentators also contributed to shaping public opinion. Some argued that similarities in style and tone were a positive sign of unity within the royal household. They pointed out that visible harmony between senior royal women could reassure the public during periods of transition. Lesser-known fact: communication advisors within royal institutions often emphasize visual unity during major constitutional shifts to project stability. From that perspective, aligning presentation styles might have been seen internally as a strength rather than a weakness. Yet media framing often simplified the story into a more dramatic rivalry narrative. Headlines rarely explained institutional strategy. Instead, they highlighted contrasts: effortless versus deliberate, modern versus traditional, future versus past. These simplified narratives spread quickly online, where short clips and images gained more attention than complex explanations. Social media users began analyzing body language, smiles, and even hand gestures, treating each appearance like evidence in an ongoing royal comparison case. One surprising detail often overlooked is how carefully royal gestures are trained and rehearsed. Greeting crowds, maintaining posture, and using consistent facial expressions are all part of formal preparation for public engagements. This means similarities in demeanor might not reflect imitation at all, but adherence to shared royal protocol. However, once public belief leans toward rivalry, even protocol-driven actions can be interpreted as personal copying. Perception, once formed, is hard to reverse. As debates intensified, another shift occurred. Some segments of the public began to express sympathy for Camilla, arguing that constant comparisons were unfair given her decades-long path to acceptance. They noted that Catherine entered royal life with strong public goodwill, while Camilla had to rebuild trust slowly through years of consistent service. This perspective reframed the narrative, not as competition, but as adaptation within a changing monarchy. It suggested that similarities might reflect institutional evolution rather than personal rivalry. Still, the popularity gap remained visible. Catherine continued to dominate headlines related to fashion influence, parenting style, and future royal leadership. Lesser-known fact: international media coverage of royal engagements often focuses heavily on figures expected to shape the monarchy's long-term direction, which naturally amplified Catherine's visibility. Attention reinforced the perception that she represented the monarchy's future, while Camilla embodied its complex history and gradual transformation. The public's opinion, therefore, did not simply choose one figure over the other. Instead, it created a layered narrative where both women symbolized different chapters of the monarchy's story. Catherine stood for renewal and modern connection. Camilla stood for resilience and institutional continuity. But when similarities in style and tone blurred those symbolic roles, confusion entered the public imagination. And confusion, inside royal storytelling, often fuels speculation more than clarity ever could. By the end of this phase, the monarchy faced a delicate communication challenge. Too much difference between senior royals could suggest division. Too much similarity could suggest imitation. Navigating that balance required careful planning, disciplined messaging, and quiet coordination behind palace walls. And according to royal commentators, those private conversations were becoming increasingly important as comparisons dominated headlines. Because while the public debated appearances and popularity, a deeper question was beginning to form behind closed doors. Were these similarities strengthening the monarchy's united image, or quietly creating tension within the royal family itself? The growing popularity gap and constant comparisons left a heavy question hanging. If the public was noticing these similarities, what was happening behind palace doors? Royal families rarely show internal tensions openly. Protocol demands unity. Smiles must remain steady. But history tells us that private conversations inside royal households can be far more complex than public appearances suggest. And according to several royal commentators, this period likely triggered quiet strategic discussions among senior members of the family. At the center of this delicate dynamic were two powerful but very different figures: Queen Camilla and Catherine, Princess of Wales. Both women held significant symbolic importance for the monarchy, yet their journeys could not have been more different. Catherine represented the future queen, youthful and globally admired. Camilla represented the queen consort, experienced and shaped by decades of public scrutiny. That contrast alone required careful balancing within family planning meetings, where every appearance and message is coordinated months in advance. Few people know that royal calendars are negotiated through a detailed process that involves multiple households, communication advisors, and private secretaries. These calendars are not just about scheduling events, they are about controlling narrative flow. If two senior royal women appear too similar in tone or style during the same period, it risks blurring their distinct public roles. That kind of overlap may look harmless to the public, but internally it can raise strategic concerns about long-term royal identity management. Reports from royal analysts suggested that internal discussions may have focused on maintaining individuality while still projecting unity. This is a long-standing royal challenge. During previous generations, senior royal women were often encouraged to develop unique public focuses. One might lead on cultural diplomacy, another on charity reform, another on family-focused initiatives. That diversification helped the monarchy appear both united and multifaceted. But when public comparisons begin highlighting similarities instead, it can disrupt that carefully planned balance. Another lesser-known detail deepens this tension. Palace insiders have often emphasized that Catherine prefers a more relaxed and conversational approach to public speaking, sometimes using fewer scripted notes during engagements. This approach aligns with modern expectations of authenticity and emotional connection. Camilla, however, traditionally relied on more structured speaking formats, reflecting the formal training she received when gradually stepping into royal life. If stylistic adjustments were introduced to align their tones more closely, it could have required careful coordination and mutual understanding within the family. Family dynamics inside monarchy are rarely about personal rivalry alone. They are often about institutional responsibility. Catherine's rising popularity placed her under immense pressure to maintain relatability without appearing overly dominant in the royal hierarchy. Camilla, meanwhile, needed to strengthen her role as queen consort without overshadowing the future queen. This delicate dance required subtle compromises. Royal historians often note that successful monarchies survive not by avoiding internal tension, but by managing it quietly and strategically. Speculation about private meetings and strategic discussions intensified as media comparisons grew louder. Some commentators suggested that senior aides may have advised maintaining a shared visual tone during major public transitions to signal unity. Others argued that preserving distinct identities was equally important to avoid confusing the public about leadership roles. Both viewpoints had merit. But whichever strategy was chosen, it likely required sensitive conversations that balanced personal comfort, institutional tradition, and public expectation all at once. One intriguing anecdote often referenced by royal watchers involves confidential briefings where communication tone, wardrobe messaging, and audience engagement style are reviewed in detail. Such briefings are not unusual in royal institutions. They help ensure that each engagement sends a consistent message aligned with the monarchy's broader goals. However, when comparisons dominate media coverage, these reviews become even more critical, as small visual or behavioral similarities can quickly become major public narratives. Emotionally, this phase may have been one of the most challenging for both women. Catherine needed to continue being authentic without appearing strategically influential. Camilla needed to adapt her public role without appearing to abandon her own established identity. Both paths carried risk. Too much adaptation might look like imitation. Too much distinction might look like division. Balancing those expectations inside one of the most scrutinized families in the world would test even the most experienced public figures. Royal commentators often remind audiences that loyalty inside royal families is rarely simple. It involves balancing personal relationships with institutional duty. Public unity must always come first, even when private disagreements exist. Lesser-known fact: historical records show that several royal households have held confidential family gatherings specifically to align public messaging during periods of intense media scrutiny. These gatherings aim not to resolve personal disputes, but to protect the monarchy's long-term image. As speculation grew, some observers wondered whether these similarities might eventually lead to a quiet reconciliation strategy, one where both women leaned into shared themes of service and stability, presenting themselves as complementary rather than competitive figures. Others feared the opposite, that persistent comparisons might create subtle pressure that neither woman could fully control, no matter how carefully they managed their public roles. And this uncertainty left one final question lingering inside royal analysis circles. Were these internal adjustments leading toward stronger unity, or setting the stage for a deeper institutional challenge that would soon move beyond image and into the realm of legal and constitutional expectations? The next phase of this story wasn't about wardrobe or smiles. It was about the monarchy's legal framework and public perception. Titles like Queen Consort are set by law and precedent, not opinion, but public trust still matters. Camilla held her role through constitutional precedent, while Catherine is preparing for hers when William becomes king. Even subtle public comparisons could influence how audiences perceive legitimacy and authority. Historically, royal image and succession planning have always been carefully coordinated. Aligning visual or behavioral styles between senior women can signal continuity between present and future monarchy phases. These similarities aren't necessarily imitation. They often ensure stability and unity in the public eye. Yet lingering questions remain. Does alignment blur individuality or reinforce cohesion? Both women maintained focus on long-term initiatives, Catherine on early childhood and mental health, Camilla on literacy and domestic violence awareness, projecting unity and complementing each other's public roles. Over time, media narratives shifted, presenting them as complementary figures, modernity and renewal alongside experience and continuity. In the end, the monarchy balanced tradition with adaptation, showing that unity can coexist with individuality. But public memory is persistent, and comparisons may resurface with every royal appearance. The story may pause, but it's far from over. The real question: were these similarities a deliberate strategy or an unintended blending of styles? And what does this mean for future royals under constant scrutiny? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more royal stories, scandals, and secrets. In the world of royalty, nothing is ever as simple as it seems, and every gesture has meaning.